Okay, so why don't we get started? So welcome to SNU UCSD webinar series. This webinar series is financially supported by Korea National Research Foundation. So today we are going to have Professor Jongkwan Lee from Ewha Womans University. He was Associate Fellow at Korea Development Institute from 2017 till 2021. He is now Assistant Professor of Economics at Ewha Womans University. He received a PhD in Economics from University of California at Davis. His research topics are immigration, local labor market, and agglomeration. He has published his papers at field top journals in economics, such as Journal of Public Economics, Regional Science, and Urban Economics. So I would like to point out we have a Q&A box in the bottom of the Zoom. You may use the Q&A box. You can ask any questions anytime during the talk. If the question is a clarifying question, I'm going to ask that question to Jongkwan. Professor Lee, you can see the question in the chat box. Then if you want, you can respond to the question during your talk. Otherwise, if the questions are fundamental, substantive, then I'm going to collect all questions and postpone them to the end of the talk. We have 60 minutes for today's webinar. The first half, the Jongkwan, Professor Lee will present his recent paper on immigration in Korea, its impact on natives. And then the second half, we're going to spend the questions and answers between panelists and from the floor too. Okay, so, okay, Jongkwan, the floor is yours. You have 30 minutes for your presentation. You can share the screen.
Thank you, Jungmin, for the introduction. Can you see the slide now?
Yes, please make it to full screen.
Yep, sure. Is it better now?
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah. Thank you very much for inviting me today. So the paper I'm going to present today is "Do Low-Skilled Immigrants Improve Native Productivity but Worsen Local Amenities? Learning from the South Korean Experience." This is a joint work in Hyejin Kim in Bank of Korea and Giovanni Perry in UC Davis. So in this paper, we studied the impact of immigration on native mobility in Korea, and we tried to rationalize those response using the labor market channel and local amenity channel. So let me begin with some trends, recent trends in immigration of Korea. So back in 1990s, South Korea was probably the most homogeneous country in the world. But now in Korea, there are lots of immigrants. For example, in 2009, there were about 1.1 million immigrants, but in 2019, it is more than 2.2 million. So we have experienced 100% increase between this 10-year period. So the most of the immigrants from Korea is actually from China and CIS countries. So we call that as overseas Korean. Someone raised a hand, and any questions already? Maybe not.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
It was a mistake. Yeah.
So the natural question is, what are the social impacts to natives from this large immigrant inflow? So in this paper, one way of answering that question is to learn from the native mobility response. So as we all know, the geographic mobility of natives is very important because, roughly speaking, we can determine whether the local conditions for natives are improved or worsened. So you can think about the utility function that depends on the local conditions, such as wages, prices, and local amenities. So the inflow of immigrants may affect these three parts, And then as a result, some natives may attracted to the regions, but some natives may leave the regions. In fact, in the literature, several studies find a small net effect on native mobility. In other words, the immigration inflow does not affect the geographic mobility of natives. We will see soon that this result also applies to South Korea. Then, based on the previous slide, it means that immigration leads to no large impact on natives. But as we all know, the immigration is a hot topic, and then there's much controversy about immigration, not only in the United States, but also in Korea. So for example, in Korea, many small and medium firms would like to hire more immigrant workers because they are experience the lack of the low-skilled workers. But on the other hand, some parents may worry about the school quality, the lowered school quality because of immigration, and they worry about the segregation of immigrants or the crime from the immigration. So then the goal is, how can we explain this inconsistency? So in this paper, we try to separate the native mobility response by regions. So in Korea, we have the data, which is the administrative data. So when you migrate, we have to do the mandatory move-in registration. And then from that mandatory move-in registration, we have to check one of the reasons why we migrate, such as job or such as education or such as housing. So using this data, we try to separate the native mobility response by regions. So in theoretical framework, we can think of the two types of natives. So putting different weight on local wage and putting different weight on local amenity. So immigration may affect the wage as well as amenity. So immigration may increase the wage because of the Korean situation, but it also lowers the local amenity. So some people might positively respond to immigration, but the other people may respond to negatively to the inflow of the immigration. So we can think about the two types of natives. In first type, the natives might migrate because of the work-related reasons. So in fact, immigration could benefit local economy, especially in the context of South Korea. So in South Korea, we have lots of high-skilled workers, and we are aging society, so we are experiencing the lack of the low-skilled workers. So immigration may provide manual labors and then reduce the cost of local services. They also complement the skills of high-skilled natives, which are abundant in South Korea. So it may benefit local economy. But on the other hand, according to the previous literature, immigration may affect local economy negatively because they may crowd out some local services such as schooling. But there are also evidence that immigration induces segregation within the cities. This is also true even in South Korea. So this paper studies the segregation of immigrant communities within Seoul, and natives actually left those neighborhoods. So let me show some findings in this slide. So what we find is there are very heterogeneous response of natives. Although the overall response of natives, overall geographic mobility of natives is null, we find very heterogeneous response. So we find strong inflow of natives due to the job-related reasons, but we also see the strong outflow of natives due to non-job reasons. So to explain this very heterogeneous response, we think about two mechanisms. The first is the labor market outcomes, and second is the worsened amenities. What we find is we find small positive effect on wage, especially the medium-skilled workers. And we also find increase in local establishments because of the mainly in service sector because of the city's population increase. But at the same time, we find the worsened amenities. So all these variables are based on the per 1,000 people. And we find the waste disposal has increased and car crashes has increased. On the other hand, we also find the the decrease in nursery facilities or private institutes and so on. So these two actually summarize the finding that this immigrant inflow actually are positively correlated with the increase in local establishments, also positively correlated with the waste emission. So here's the outline of the talk. So I first talk about the background and data. So basically, I'm going to tell you about the recent increase in immigrants in Korea, and then I'm going to talk about the native migration because this data is special. We want to spend some time on this, and then I explain empirical specification. We actually present 3 different types of results: the internal migration of natives, and labor market outcomes, and local amenities. So let me first think about the context of South Korea. So as I said before, South Korea is an extreme example of highly educated and aging society. So as a result, we are actually experiencing very lack of low-skilled workers in agriculture or personal services and construction. So this was even more serious during the COVID-19 situation because lots of immigrant workers did not come to the Korea. So we are actually in the newspaper, every day we see the small and medium firms are experiencing the lack of low-skilled workers. So in fact, because we are experiencing lack of low-skilled workers, these immigrant inflow is very low-skill intensive. So almost quarter, the 75% of them are working craft workers, assembling, or elementary workers. So in economics framework, this is a case in which the effect on native wage to be positive. Not only according to the Ottaviano and Perry model, but also according to the Boras 2003 model, because in Korea, there are lots of high-skilled workers. And on the other hand, immigrants are very low-skill intensive. And because of the complementarity between the low-skilled and high-skilled workers, the wage effect in theory should be positive. But on the other hand, immigration likely reduces local amenities. So one channel is a decrease in the local human capital. So according to the Diamond 2016 paper, increase in local human capital is associated with the increase in local amenities, and that further attracts the high-skilled workers. But in this framework, because immigrants in Korea is mostly low-skilled, that will lower the local human capital. And cities with lots of immigrants may experience the decrease in local amenities. So let me explain more about let me compare the natives with the immigrants. So in terms of education, so these 2 categories include some college or education and college degree. Almost half of natives have the college degree in Korea. On the other hand, for the immigrants, it's less than 30%. It's more clear when you see the occupation. So lots of natives work as managers, professionals, or service workers. But most of the immigrants, more than 75%, work as craft workers, assembly workers, and elementary workers. So on the other hand, it's likely that the immigrant skill complement natives in terms of education as well as occupation. So this map shows the increase in immigrants during our period of analysis between 2010 and 2015. So as you can see, there's significant variation of the immigration inflow across municipalities in Korea. So on average, the increase was 1.7% of working age population in 2010. But there are some regions that experience more than 9% increase in immigration based on the working age population in 2010. You may think that immigration is concentrated on this Seoul metropolitan area, but there are other regions, the small rural regions such as Umseong or other regions. So there's a Q&A here. So the question was, the place of work and residence can be different. The place with a lot of immigrants become cheap, people who care about education move up, and low-skilled native people move into there. So here, I think you're talking about the definition of local labor market. So we use different geographic area, and then the simple answer is our results are essentially the same when you use the different geographic area. So maybe I can talk later about this. So next, let me talk about the source of the data. So we use many different types of administrative data. The first data set we used is foreign residents from the Ministry of the Interior and Safety. So here from this data, we can know the location of immigrants for each city. So the definition of immigrants in this paper is those who have stayed in Korea for longer than 90 days. So we exclude the short-term visitors here. And the most important data set, we have the statistics on internal migration. So it provides the origin and destination of migrants and the main reason for the moving. So as I said in the beginning, the Korean people, when they migrate, they have to check the region out of these 7 categories: job, education, family, residential housing, natural environment, and other regions. So using this data, we try to rationalize the native mobility response of the native mobility response. For the amenity data, we use the data from Statistics Korea, and then we can know this data, we can use these variables. And other data set, for the local labor market outcomes, we use the census as well as regional employment survey. And finally, the census zone establishments. And finally, the housing prices is from the Korea Real Estate Board. So because our main data set is the internal migration data, we wanna show some characteristics using this data set. So because although there are 7 categories, we wanna collapse these into 2 categories for job and non-job. Because job is pretty obvious that people migrate because of job, but it's not very obvious whether people, what's the reason for the family or what's the reason for the housing. So we collapse non-job reasons as 1 categories. So the first scatter plot shows the relationship between the job migration and non-job migration. Although they are positively correlated, so there are significant heterogeneity. So it's likely that these 2 migrations capture different moves. So we relate each migration with the wage growth, which is local labor market conditions, and some local amenities, the waste per person and number of car prices. So as you can see, for the wage growth, the job migration is positively related to the wage growth. And so in other words, natives move to the place with higher wage growth, but on the other hand, non-job migration is essentially the correlation is 0 with the wage growth. But if you see the amount of waste per person, the job migration is slightly positively correlated, but non-job migration is negatively correlated. So for non-job migration, they do respond to the local amenities or disamenities. So they avoid the place with lots of waste per person, same for the number of car crashes per 1,000 vehicles. So from these scatter plots, we know that the job migration likely captures the labor market conditions. On the other hand, non-job migration likely captures the migration because of the local amenities. So here's our empirical framework. So as I explained, the dependent variable is the net migration of natives by type J, which is job or non-job. Our main explanatory variable is the change in immigrants between 2010 to 15, normalized by the working age population in 2010. For control variables, we control for the local labor demand shifts using the famous Baltic IV. And then other local characteristics based on the 2010 include population or share of the elder, rural residents, and college educated. We also include the 46 living zone fixed effects. So we compare the municipalities within this living zone. And finally, the epsilon is the error term. So based on our simple theory, we expect the following. So the beta job would be positive if immigration benefit the local economies in terms of the labor market. On the other hand, the beta non-job would be negative if immigration worsen the local amenities. But as we all know, this beta J's could be biased due to immigrant selection into local economies. So immigrants may select into the local economies with the booming regions. But also there are other unobservable shocks to the local economy, so the beta could be biased. So to relieve this concern, we use instrument variable. So intuitively, we use the predetermined ethnic communities across cities in 2003 as our main instrument variable. We interact that with the natural increase in overseas Korean during 2010 to 2015. So this graph summarized a series of policy change in Korea. So in 1999, there was an enactment of acts on the immigration and legal status of overseas Koreans. So in 1999, the law said almost all overseas Koreans are freely enter to the Korea. So they have almost same status as the natives. But in the beginning, the Chinese and CIS area Koreans were excluded. But after the series of the change in law in 2003 and finally 2008, the second expansion of this F4 visa finally includes the China. So as a result, this gray is the F4 holders, and then the gray dotted line is the F4 Korean Chinese. So almost no F4 visas in here, but during our period of analysis, we experienced a significant increase in F4 holders, especially for Korean Chinese. So we distribute this increase according to the 2003 distribution across cities in Korea. So the main idea is new immigrants may want to locate to the cities with lots of their nationalities. So this is the former equation of our instrument. So SNC 2003 is the share of immigrants from origin country N in CDC in 2003. So using this as weight, we distribute the increase in overseas Korean during this period according to this weight. And then we summarize across the nationalities. So essentially this numerator is the predicted increase in the overseas Korean. And we finally standardize by dividing by the working age population in 2010. So this is similar to the standard shift share, but the only difference is we use the overseas increase in national overseas Korean instead of all immigrants. Alternatively, we also use the standard shift share to check the robustness of our findings. So this is our first stage scatter plot. So on the x-axis, we have the predicted immigrant inflows, which is our IV. And on the y-axis, we have the immigrant inflows. So as you can see, they are positively correlated. And then this formal regression result shows that 1 percentage point increase in predicted increase actually leads to the increase in overseas Korean for 1.5 percentage points. So this is greater than 1 because overseas Korean might attract other types of immigrants, such as the workers or the married immigrants. So as you can see, the first stage F study is greater than 30, so it's not, we can relieve the concern on the weak instrument bias. So far we talk about the power of the instrument, and then let me talk about a little bit about the recent discussion on the validity of this instrument. So there are many papers about these Bartik style instruments. So we address these concerns using 2 ways. So essentially our instrument used a variation of the Chinese. So according to this Goldsmith-Pinkham paper, the Rothenberg weight is highest for China. So we test the parallel pre-trends for this Chinese, and also we check the robustness of the results using the standard shift share. So this shows that essentially for the pre-period between 1995 to 2003 or 1998 to 2003, our instrument is not correlated with the pre-trend. So finally, I can present our results. So panel A is the weighted least square. As you can see, the job is significant, but after instrumenting, job is still positive and significant, but non-job migration becomes negative and significant. Although, so the sum of these two becomes the overall. So in overall response of natives is not significant. We see very heterogeneous response of natives according to job and non-job. We want to decompose this into the in-migration and out-migration. For both in and out migration, for job migration, they are positive and significant, but the estimate is higher for the in-migration. So in reality, immigration may increase the job mobility in the cities, but more on the in-migration, so the net migration is positive. But for non-job migration, only out migration is significant. So because of immigration, the natives leave the cities for the non-job regions. So we try to rationalize these two different behaviors using the labor market outcomes as well as the local amenities. So panel B is the IB readers. So as you can see in 4, 5, 6, we see the strong expansion of service sectors because of immigration. There are increase in the local establishments, especially on the service sector, as well as the low-skilled manufacturing, but not for the high-skilled or medium-skilled manufacturing sectors. So this well explains the inflow of natives for the job regions. And then for the local amenities, for the red boxes, we see the decrease in some education quality. We see the daycare facilities decrease significantly, as well as the private tutoring centers are also decreased significantly. And we also, at the same time, we see the increase in disamenities, such as the waste or car prices. So this may explain the out-migration of natives due to immigration. And finally, we also investigate the effect on housing prices. So it's likely that labor market effect is positive, that local amenity effect is negative. So the overall effect in housing prices would be likely small. So in the IV results, we almost find no effect except for the small positive effect on the apartment rent during the period. So one last question we have is, according to our migration data, we can classify the move by the characteristics of the households. Then we were curious about who are most sensitive in terms of the amenities. So by comparing the relative size between job and non-job migration, we can roughly say this group is the most sensitive. So we classify the households according to the single, male and female, young singles, and then the families with children. So for the single, the coefficient for job and non-job are almost similar, the size of the coefficient, although the sign is the opposite. It's slightly greater for female. So female might be more responding to the changes in local amenities, but the biggest group is the families with children. So the job coefficient is about 0.3, but non-job coefficient is minus 0.7. So quite large difference. So in other words, families with children leave the region because of this decrease in local amenities, such as decreased school quality or increased disamenities. Okay, so in this paper, we evaluate the impact of the increase in immigration in the South Korean context. We find that cities with large immigration attracted natives for job regions, but pushed out natives for other regions. So for the channels, we explain using the labor market channel and then the reduced local amenities. And finally, as a result, we don't find any impact on the local housing prices. So what in this paper, what we say is, although immigration did not affect the net population or net migration of natives, it might change the selection of people in cities. So that's our conclusion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so Stefan, you want to go first because you have to leave early? Oh, okay, one second. So we go.
Sorry, I just had to unmute. First of all, thanks very much for this really interesting paper. Of course, it's interesting for Americans because, you know, this debate is very hot here as well. But let me ask a couple of questions about the way you attribute motivation. As I understood it, you've got a response item which includes a variety of non-job reasons for migrating, but it seemed as if you attributed all of the non-job reasons to the decline in local amenities, when the survey provides a variety of other reasons for movement, and including family. I think there was a category, something like residential environment, education, and so on. Did I just miss this? Am I confused about something?
You are absolutely right. And then we actually have each category in our paper. And then actually the response is quite similar. So all they are negative, but some are significant and some are not significant. So because of there are so many categories, say 7 categories. So we want to try to rationalize into one category which captures the local. So it's quite obvious that education is quite obvious, but it's not so obvious what is the family reason. So the government says it's the, say, marriage or something, and the natural environment and the residential environment. So those are likely captured the local amenities. And then we also think that not the local amenity is the only channel that explain the net migration of natives. There are other regions, but we want to say this might be one channel that explain the non-job migration.
Right. I just want to make sure that I'm clear in my objection, because I don't think that these categories actually are that obvious. So, for example, education could reflect a concern about decline in the quality of local education, which would be your amenities story, but it could simply be I'm moving because there's some educational opportunity somewhere else.
Exactly. So likely, so education might include the movement of young college students, actually, which might be not that relevant in this context.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Okay, so yeah, Munsub?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, thank you for a great presentation. So given that your visa relies on this F4 visa, so could you tell us a little bit more about that visa? So I want to understand whether this increase in the immigrants is more persistent or the temporary. So how many years do they typically stay in Korea under the visa system? And then what do you think about the natives when they make that migration decision? Do you think that the change in the composition of the people in the local area is going to be persistent if the visa, the system is for the temporary workers?
I think the change is very, very persistent because with the F4 visa, they can stay in Korea as long as they possible. So their status is almost same with the natives. So you may know the famous singer Yoo Seung-jun. He wants to get the F4 visa actually. So to tell more about the story, so it was started in 1999. But the people from China were excluded because at the beginning, they were excluded if they left South Korea before 1948, which is the establishment of Korean government. But I think the main reason was they were worried about the labor market outcomes of natives. But some people against on that issue. So finally, in 2008, they finally included people from China. So that's why we have experienced significant increase in the immigrants from China. And as you may or not know, in Korea, in Seoul, if you visit Daerimdong or someplace, more than 50% of residents is from China, actually. So that actually made some community in there. I think that will be very, very persistent, I think.
So then one follow-up question is that, so that means the Korean people, including the natives and immigrants, are heavily segregated, right?
Yeah,
so,
within a city.
Within a okay, so within a city across the neighborhood, the Daerimdong example, right?
Yeah.
I see. So the net effect is 0, but what you are finding is this kind of the segregation. Okay, got it. Thanks.
So one thing is I have another paper which is the mobility within a city. So in this case, in this paper, we have net effect is 0, but within a city, net effect is minus actually.
Okay, so we have a question in the chat box from Professor Chamna Yoon. He said the place of work and residence can be different. The place with a lot of immigrants become cheaper. People who care about education, they move out. Low-skill native people move into there. So can you talk about? I think this is somewhat related to this within municipality identification, because I think he's talking about, so you have found this heterogeneous effect between job related and non-job related, but he's pointing out the place of work and the residence could be different.
Yeah, he said I already answered the questions during the talk. Okay. My answer was basically when we use the local labor market definition instead of so in this paper we use the 229 cities, but if you collapse that into the 160 or 130, the results are essentially the same. So although we cannot exactly know the place of residence, the place of work and residence, the effect would be similar.
Okay, so Brandon or Troy, if you have any comment, then you can unmute yourself. And
okay, thank you. So I just had a quick question, Jongkwan, but it might not be relevant to your research. I was wondering if you guys looked at all into like illegal immigration and whether that has an effect, because I feel like the ramifications of legal versus illegal immigration might be very different.
That's a very good question. So in this data set, we know the number of illegal immigrants, because when immigrants enter Korea, they get some visas, and then after they expire their visa, they become illegal immigrants. So the Korean government counts the number of those illegal immigrants, but location might be not that precise. So their location is recorded as their last location when their visa was expired. So in that sense, we have some measurement error in the increase in the immigration, but hopefully our instrument relieve the concern on that part. I think I think your question is the impact of legal immigration and the impact of illegal immigration. It would be very interesting to compare those effects. My guess is maybe the impact of illegal immigration is stronger in terms of the crowding out effect, but unfortunately, we cannot know the effect from the data.
Do you have any idea about the size of illegal immigrants in Korea? Do you have the government estimate?
Not that many, but I do know that that share is very increasing these days, especially during the COVID.
Oh.
So maybe it's not very precise, but I would say 5%.
5% of immigrants?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Troy, do you have any comment or questions?
Sure. Well, thank you, Professor Lee, for taking the time to have this talk. I know that this particular paper focuses on the timeline of 2010 to 2015, but I was curious as to if you had any insight about how, how does your model look when applied to nowadays, net migration, also taking into consideration the effects that COVID-19 might have had on this, which you talked a little bit about.
Yep, very, very interesting question. So the reason we use 2010 to 2015 is the labor market data is available every 5 years per census. But if you use 2020, that includes the COVID. So we want to just get rid of the effect from the COVID. So if we measure the impact between 2010 to 2019, actually, I think the positive effect in terms of labor market would be greater because the period is more like a long run. So in the long run, the capital adjustment would take place. So the positive effect would be even more greater, and negative effects, maybe, I don't know, maybe that also greater. So it's more like a segregated community. But during the COVID, actually, I'm working on that issue. So during the COVID, in Korea, another part of immigration in Korea is the so-called employment permit system. So the small and medium firms can use the immigrants using the employment permit system. But during the COVID, that system does not work because no immigrants came into Korea. So many firms are actually experiencing the lack of low-skilled workers. So I heard that, so there are many illegal immigrants in Korea and their wage is very, very high now. So their wage is even greater than the natives. So lots of natives don't want to work in the agriculture or fisheries. So those illegal immigrants are just moving around to get the higher wage. So that's the anecdotal story now during the COVID. But I just want to, in the near future, I just want to investigate on that issue as well.
Yeah, I have a question. So in the literature on segregation, there is this theory of tipping point. So the segregation jumps at a point. There is a qualitative, fundamental change point. So I wonder. This. What does this imply to your specification, empirical specification? I'm thinking about a kind of a nonlinear effect of immigrant on natives. Have you thought about this nonlinear effect, tipping point hypothesis?
That's very interesting. We haven't thought about it. So basically, according to your argument, it might be the effect is more pronounced when the increase in immigration is higher. So we can do, according to our X variable, we can classify, say, upper 50% and lower 50%. We can investigate that issue for sure. But I haven't. Actually, I do agree with you that the effect might be stronger for the regions with the highest increase in immigration.
Particularly because you're interested in heterogeneous effect between like a job-related and non-job-related immigrations. I think like a non-job-related migrations more like tipping point type change, because you're talking about school quality and neighborhood quality, and if you have just a small number of immigrants, in your neighborhood, it doesn't matter. They don't matter much. But if they become like the majority, then the quality significantly deteriorates. So I'm thinking about, yeah.
So your question made me think about in terms of density as well. So more densely populated area, the effect might be stronger. But so one way is to investigate the effects according to the Seoul capital area and non-Seoul capital area. That might be interesting as well. Yep, thank you.
Yeah, so in that sense, I think that your sample period is probably too short. Because on the other hand, those effects appear in the long run. It takes time. The change in the quality of neighborhood, takes time. So I'm thinking, can you like extend? So this is related to the previous questions. Can you extend your data period to like a 2005, 2000 or 2020 probably also available now?
Yeah. The one reason we didn't use the 2010 is because of COVID. The COVID just slowed down the immigration. But for the mobility part, we can expand it to say at least 2019, although we cannot see the labor market effect or the local amenity part because of the COVID-19. Actually, I think the estimate what we found is the effect from say 2003 to 2015, because we used the variation in 2003, but our effect is just only for this period. But I think that in that part, the most of the change occurs maybe after 2008. So it might also include that part. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also wondering, the one question in the chat box, the question is about China versus non-China immigration. So I think the main variation you're exploiting is from the Korean Chinese, but they are very similar to native Koreans. We some, but we don't have any problem with communicating each other. So there's no language problem. So that I think that's very different situation from the U.S., for example. So any problem you have found is actually underestimating the potential problem with immigration. Because I think you are focusing on the Korean Chinese. Have you? Isn't it possible to separate the effects from the Korean Chinese and the non-Korean Chinese immigration?
I think we did, and then the effect is as you expected. The effect is greater for the Korean Chinese for the non-job migration crowding out part. And one problem of that is we cannot estimate by the nationality, because our IB is mainly driven by the increase in Korean Chinese. And other than Korean Chinese, there are say countries like Vietnam or Russia or Uzbekistan. And I expect in the near future, the composition might change a lot, because I heard that in China, the Korean Chinese is also aging, so their supply will be limited. But these days, the immigrants country is becoming more diversified. Say Vietnam or Philippines, those countries are actually increasing. So back in 1990s, the most of the immigrants are from Japan. The China was very small part, but because of this law change, the Korean Chinese increased significantly. Now I think they are at the maximum, and then other countries are maybe increasing in say 20 to 30 years from now on.
Yeah, on the other hand, I feel like your findings could be relevant to future reunified Korea if we, when we have a North Korean immigrants.
Right.
They are more likely to be similar to Korean Chinese. So
right.
I guess there is some implication. Have you written that implication in your paper?
No. It would be very
Okay.
interesting too. Just if we have a unification, that would be very interesting. But I agree with the effect will be similar, but the size of the shock would be way greater in terms of unification. So we'll see.
What's the gender composition of immigrants?
It's more like a male. So, but it varies according to the type of the immigrants. For example, the EPS workers, the employment permit system is mainly male. But I think the overseas Koreans are relatively more female there. But in general, I think there are more male immigrants.
This doesn't include the people move to Korea because of a marriage, international marriage.
It also includes the married immigrants, yeah.
So do they have a F4 visa?
No, they have different visas. They have the married immigrant visa. Yep.
Okay. So one last question from me is just a general question. Your opinion. So you're working on this immigration issues in Korea. So people are saying that because the low fertility and aging, so our population is shrinking. So the immigrant is a new source of labor force. What would you think about this idea? So we have to open to immigrants more actively. So what do you think about that?
I think it's one of the options that slowing down the decrease in the population. And actually, I do think that we cannot avoid the increase in immigrants in near future. Then I think we have to prepare for that. One way of doing that is to have more like good immigrants now. So we sort of need to screen the immigration using our system. One way is the employment permit system. They are now guest workers and they are temporary workers. They have to go back after 4 years and 10 months. But one way is after spending that time, the 4 years, and then we need to make them stay in Korea so that if we have good immigrants, our instrument story tells us if we have the good immigrants, the future immigrants will be good because of the network effect. So we need to prepare how to deal with those increase in immigrants. And one way is to preserve the good immigrants now.
Okay, so I have no further question. Moonsop, do you have any final comment, or Brandon or Troy, do you have any follow-up comment or question? Okay, then, okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Professor Lee, for nice talk and nice discussion. Okay, so this concludes our webinar today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.